So, welcome to the next edition of the Rare Business Podcast. With me today, I have Alison Essie, who is co-founder and director of The Storytellers, no less. Welcome. How are you doing?
Thank you. Very well, thank you.
So, Alison, for the benefit of our listeners and readers, can you tell us a little bit about you and tell us a little bit about the work that you do?
Sure. Well, I am one of the founders of this consultancy, The Storytellers. We started the business about 13 years ago around my kitchen table. There were 4 of us, and we had no clients, we had no product, no methodology, nothing, but we had a brilliant idea. And we hadn't made it tangible, and that's what we set out to do. And that was to use story and storytelling as a tool or a means by which we would be able to dramatically accelerate the pace of change in organisations.
Okay.
By really appealing to mindsets of people. But we specialise in a very specific area of culture change, and that is about hearts, minds, belief, attitudes. It's that intangible human side of change, which is often the most difficult to achieve. But when change fails, it's usually because of that. So it's a very important part of it.
There's a frightening statistic that says 70% of all change and transformation programs fail. And more often than not, it's because they underinvest in training, communication, skills-based type of behaviour change, etc., etc.
And it's about this whole thing about culture, and creating a culture where people feel that they aren't victims of change, but they are protagonists of change. That they can actually have some degree of control over the outcome or the sort of the end game.
Okay.
So we started this business without a clue about what we were going to do, but then went about designing a very practical, very, very creative methodology. And fast forward 13 years, we've now worked with...
You're not still working around your kitchen table?
Well, no, not unless I can. I love working around my kitchen table because it means I don't have to commute into London.
Very good.
But we've now worked with over 160 major global organisations, and they are truly global. They're spread all over the world. We've got clients in the States. We're working with a big company in Malaysia at the moment, which is very exciting, but all over Europe, sort of all over the world.
Very good.
So we are, well, I still pinch myself when I think about our clients, but it has been an amazing journey and a real success. So
fantastic. Well
so
done.
Any entrepreneurs out there, just believe in your idea and you can go and do it.
Get yourself a kitchen table.
Absolutely.
So the reason that we got put in touch with each other is because you've just written this new research report called 2 Years Warning, the Customer Centricity Crisis.
Yes.
Now, it's quite a stark title, but I'm sure we'll get into that. But can you tell me a bit about the report and how it came about and why you wrote it?
Well, it was really sparked by this very clear evidence in the surge of interest that companies are starting to have in this whole idea about customer centricity. You can imagine we get approached by and go to see an awful lot of clients, and if there's one thing I can say almost always in common they're looking for is to really create this culture where the customer sits at the heart of their operation. And it's not just lip service. I think they realise that this marketplace is saturated. All companies are selling the same products, the same services. There's very little room for differentiation at the moment. So really it's really down to your people and how they exhibit the kind of behaviours that deliver your brand promise, if you like. So having heard time and time again clients saying we need to do this, we need to get more customer centric, we thought we'd delve a little bit deeper and to find out why there is this sort of need and what's going on. And it is a stark headline because it's a bit shocking.
So I've read the report.
Okay.
So tell me kind of, and for the benefit of listeners and readers, and tell me the main headlines, because the main headlines are, oh my word.
Yeah. Well, the headlines are extraordinary. The headline of this report is that 3/4 of business leaders believe their company won't survive beyond the next 2 years unless they put more focus on their customers. But conversely, in the next breath, nearly half of them have got more important business issues to focus on. And there is a statistic in this report that talks about the 65% of leaders, bear in mind they've only got 2 years to do this, believe that it's not up to them at all, it's up to the next C-suite, it's up to the next generation of leaders to actually make this happen.
I hope they're leaving in the next month.
In the next month, exactly. So we were thinking, hang on a second, there's this massive sense of urgency that their company isn't going to survive, and yet there's this complacency about, well, it's not really up to us, it's up to others. That's one side of the report which we found startling.
So let's jump into that. So there's three. Let me just making a note here. There's 3 bits. There's the urgency. There's other issues, and then there's somebody else's job.
Yeah.
Right. Well, so I can understand the urgency sort of thing, because that's almost like a marketplace-driven sort of thing. But given the statement around we're going to be toast in the 2 years if we don't kind of deal with this, but we've got more important issues. What are more important? I mean, is the building on fire?
Well, I think the tension and the conflict here, and bear in mind that we actually interviewed the most successful companies in the world, so these are big, well-established giants.
Right.
Is the problem is that they have these people called shareholders who expect returns on a fairly short-term basis.
Yeah.
And I think that you have these leaders who have to do quarterly reporting. So every quarter they have to answer to the city or answer to their local financial sort of authorities, if you like, how the company is doing. And I think all of their efforts go into this very short-term results about profitability.
Right.
And quite often that profitability is not necessarily conducive, or the desire to create that profitability is not conducive to creating great customer experience.
So that pressure mitigates against investing in initiatives that are going to deliver on the customer centricity, because you've got this big counterweight over here. So then Unilever's strategy of going, we're not doing quarterly reporting anymore, it's starting to look pretty good right about now.
Yeah. Okay. And I think that the other problem with customer centricity is that it's a longer term thing to do. If you are going to, and you'll know from the report that it's not just about people, it's also about systems and processes. To change systems and processes takes time, to get them embedded, it all takes time. And if you've got your leaders who are saying, but no, we need to be reporting our profits on a quarterly basis, and that's going to interfere with that, or even that's going to temporarily depress that, then that could be a good reason. Okay. So I think that this whole short-term, long-term thing is something to do with it.
And so how do they balance off this then? The third issue is like somebody else's job. I mean, how do they balance off with this idea? So you've got the urgency, you've got other issues which seem to be primarily market-based, sort of investor pressure, shareholder pressure, etc. And you've got 2 years, and then it's somebody else's job. I mean, how do they square that? That's a bit like almost... it's like, it's not happening. There's a bit of denial in there.
It is a little bit of denial, and also I think that they recognise that what I talked about, the long term, that they recognise that there are things that have to happen, but they'll be in the long term, and therefore think, actually, I probably won't be around then when those things happen. Okay. And therefore, it's up to the next lot of people to do it.
Fascinating. I mean, did anybody have... I mean, because I know that I've spoken to other sort of people in boards, reflected on boards before, and how decision making at board level can take some time to... There's a gestation around decision making, and from gather the information, start thinking about the decision, make a decision, and then implementation, and then you see the impact, and that can be sometimes as long as 2 years.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of that is often driven by the complexity of organisations and the layers and layers of complexity that they have to go through. There are certain complexity issues in financial services, for example, which you can't avoid because they are more about compliance than anything. Yeah. But in other organisations, it's incredibly difficult to actually get anything moving because of the length and the breadth and the depth of of the organisation as a whole, and making things simple. We have a number of clients now who are beginning to thinking about restructuring entirely to make it simple, to make everything in their operation more simple. And hallelujah, because I think that's what all businesses need to do.
Yeah. But what's interesting thing is the thing that came out of the report, because you'd say if people are going to want to make things simple, and then there's the complexity, it's not just about kind of processes and systems, it's also about kind of people and structure, organizational structure.
Yeah.
So then there's this other sort of like tension in the report where the C-suite or the leaders that you're speaking to are like, oh, yeah, we know we need to do this, but we don't really trust our people.
Yeah.
And what's at the root of that? Is that more about them not giving them trust and then allowing them to learn as they go and then they support them, or is it just that they don't think they have the quality of kind of people?
Well,
or
no,
is it both?
I think for me this is one of the most worrying things of all. I think that, if you'll have to bear with me on this one.
No, it's fine.
I think there is a new breed of leadership emerging.
Okay.
It's a much better leadership breed, but it's not necessarily pervasive in society, in the corporate world. And that is about trust.
Yeah.
It's about trust, not just from leaders to their employees, but employees' trust of leaders. And I think that the new breed of leader is a leader who is emotionally intelligent, who understands that they have to be visionary, it's not just a managerial thing, that they have to take their people through change with them, which means they've got to be inspirational. And they've also got to be authentic as leaders, because people will not believe them if they don't walk the talk.
Sure.
Now that is what is going to build mutual trust. Trust isn't one way, it's two way. So although I think that in the report it talks about the C-suite not really trusting their employees, and that could be also because at that level maybe they just get to hear the bad stories, or they don't necessarily, they're a bit more disconnected with the reality of what's going on in an organisation.
So do you actually think that there's a possibility that, now we talk about how the impact of the internet and new technology and so on and so forth, but that actually, and that's been around for some time now, and its impact is it's almost completely global and pervasive and so on and so forth, although it's still a long way to go. But actually, are we in a transition kind of period in that we're still unpicking ways of what we did, how things were done and how things have been done for the last hundreds years or a few numbers of decades, and into moving into a new sort of era where we have to do things different. Things have to be a bit more organic. They have to be a bit more agile, a bit very much simpler, kind of a lot more kind of trust and empowerment and things. And is it that we're still dealing with it, not the hangover, but what was left from?
I think there are many organisations that, I mean, we obviously go and see, we only work with very large organisations, so we go into the boards of a huge number of organisations where you kind of think, crikey, they haven't moved on an awful lot. And on the other hand, there are lots of executive teams of businesses which are refreshingly with it and understand the real big issues. So I think it's very mixed. But I think that there's a little bit of a hangover from the past. And again, I think that comes down to the complexity of organisations that makes it very difficult for this fresh new thinking to come through. But I think that one of the biggest drivers is about consumer behaviours and technology driving. The power lies with the consumer now, not with the company. They are at the end. They're at the mercy of the consumer.
Sure.
So when you've got platforms like TripAdvisor, you've got all of these different platforms with social media for people to talk about the brand. They don't control that brand anymore, and I think that is what the biggest driver is. So I think that it's happening quicker, and I think that leaders are changing quicker. I think that the number of companies we talk to, you can definitely see that there's this desire to move into the new world. But it's not that simple, and I think there are challenger companies coming up who've really got it. And they're not the big beasts that we've been talking to here.
No,
they're the big threat, I think.
Well, I'm really it makes me think is that there's. So in a couple of days, actually, I'm going to go and see a man which, if you think about it from his behaviour and how they run their business, would probably be in that sort of the new breed, as it were. And yet this business has been around for over 100 years. So do you know Timpson's?
Yes.
Franchise.
Franchise.
It's not franchised.
Is it not?
It's a family business.
Okay.
But they just let their employees run the business as if it's their own.
Okay.
And so
I'm my mistake.
So I'm going to go meet John Timpson.
Okay.
Who's the chairman of the business.
That's very interesting.
And they've always kind of had this approach around head office is only there to help. If you see any people at head office issuing any diktats or any policy sort of things, tell me, because that's not what we're there for, and we'll get them to stop. We trying really hard to stop people doing that, but it's a hard habit to break. And we spend most of our time out of the office speaking to the people that run the shops and so on and so forth. So we have very simple rules. It's all about the people, and I just think that's an interesting sort of lesson. I'm really looking forward to speaking to him, because I went to see him. I went to a conference that I was presenting at, and he was doing one of the keynotes, and he finished, and I was like, "You're now my number one superhero." It was awesome, but it's like a real. It's very fresh. It's very modern,
forward thinking,
but very forward thinking sort of thing.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to go and speak to him. But I think maybe there's an interesting sort of dynamic around. We've got this technology and reporting and emails and laptops and phones and all these sort of things, and actually we get sucked into it. And sucked into meetings and everything else, and actually maybe it's about. It seems to me some of the most effective leaders are the ones that can separate themselves from that and actually just go around and just talk to people.
Absolutely. And
be seen.
Yeah.
And be
Visible.
seen to seen to care.
I completely agree. I mean, I think that the leaders. We talk a lot about walking the talk and role modelling. You can't role model something if you're locked away in a boardroom somewhere. That's not how your people are going to see you and how they're going to emulate your kind of behaviours.
Yeah.
And if you want to strengthen your brand and reinforce your brand to be known as the brand that does X or the brand that does Y, and any customer can expect to get X type of service, you've got to be showing those people what it is we mean by a certain behaviour.
Yeah, sure.
And that's down to the leaders to do that.
And not something that you get in an email or some piece of kind of.
And it's interesting that Timpson, because their behaviour as little organisations that pop up everywhere, literally in a little tiny little mobile kind of van, is very much of. You would think they were a franchised organisation by their behaviours.
Sure.
I think the challenge with that, though, is how do you maintain this really strong brand? This service that is exemplary of your brand when you give so much power to your employees. But that's what we're trying to say here, is that there is not enough of that.
I'll tell you some more once I've met John.
Yes, no, I'd love to hear that.
So let me circle back in terms of the to go back to the sort of not the trust thing, and I'm interested in sort of how far that goes. I mean, is it that the C-suite's not trusting the next level, or is it all the way down? Because actually, what's interesting, because we talk about all this sort of stuff and management layers and stuff, and I have a sense when people talk about customer centricity and change and all of these different things, is that sometimes middle managers, people talk about frontline and then they talk about C-suite, and then you've got these middle managers,
the granite wall of middle management,
and they're just turning around and they're just going like, well, what about us?
Yeah.
And they seem to be like the forgotten tribe in many ways.
Absolutely. I mean, middle managers, if you speak to any leadership team, they'll all shake their heads and sigh and say, oh, it's the middle managers, they're the issue here. But actually, I mean, as you can see in this report, that middle managers actually don't agree with leaders at all. They think they're doing a fantastic job.
Right.
But the middle management is the layer in an organisation where messages from up above either get dissolved or diluted or distorted, because middle managers and they are the most critical mass here. They are the people who will say, if it's not relevant to me, I will make up my own story around this, and then that's what their teams will hear. Yeah. So it's absolutely critical that the leaders, the more senior leaders, really need to connect better with the middle manager. And I think that's really where you can unlock these issues. But clearly there's actually quite a significant disconnect at the moment between leaders and the middle managers, and therefore de facto with more junior employees.
You'd rather hope they go out and talk to each other or start talking to each other a bit more.
Yeah, but I think there is great hope, because from all of the middle management communities we talk to, they can be very cynical.
Yeah.
They can be extremely, we've been there, we know what's going on, we're at the sharp end of business, we've heard all of this before, we don't believe in this. But actually most of the time it's about confidence, and it's about being able to create that line of sight and inspiring them as to how they can actually contribute to a higher purpose, or a clear,
or asking for their opinion.
Yes, it's so much of what we talk about is about dialogue. It's about starting a conversation. Don't just go and do to people. Start a conversation and solicit their views and opinions about what life's like, and then take that on board and actually make that part of your message. Okay. And then you'll find that people take ownership of it much more.
But that's again, we're in this environment where we're under, many organisations are under pressure to do the reporting, produce results, and it's like ever increasing kind of profits. And you think, okay, fine. I mean, you get to the point where like, well, where's it all going to come from?
So what about the companies that aren't having to report, that are privately owned? They are suffering from the same issues, and it's not, you can't blame it on shareholders, because they don't necessarily.
I mean, I think there's pressure. There's a pressure, and then it's like the response to the to the pressure.
Absolutely. But what I'm saying is that, unfortunately, we see the same issues in companies where there are no shareholders, other than perhaps the owners of the organisation. And so what about those? Because they're clearly there are the same issues actually happening there.
So the reporting is illusory in many ways. The pressure of the market can be almost illusory.
You can't blame it all on reporting.
Okay.
I think it's a factor, but I don't think you can blame it all.
So it's big. You described some big challenges. I mean, so what would you think? I mean, then these applies to not just big organisations, but also smaller ones as well. It's just like you get a smaller one and blow up, it becomes a big one. It just becomes more complex.
Yeah.
What do people need to do to get past this?
Okay. Firstly, I think every company, there are lots of things, but the first thing I'd say is, firstly, a company needs to have a very clear purpose. And I think companies need to be far more purpose-led than perhaps they
more
have been.
than just make money for your shareholders.
Absolutely. They need to have a higher purpose, something about why do we exist beyond making money?
Okay.
And start to generate a sense of pride around that, and start to connect everything you do in your organisation to that purpose.
Okay.
Now, one of the things that we help companies to do, and I think this is what every business needs, whether they're tiny, we have one ourselves and we're 25 people, is to have a really strong narrative about the journey that you're on as a business. That has a very clear sense of purpose, a very clear sense of pride. It spells out the challenges, but it also looks at the opportunities and where we're going with this.
Okay.
But most importantly of all, I think it needs to be a call to action to people, so that they feel that they are going to become the protagonists of this story, that they can actually be a hero of the story, and therefore they have a contribution to play, and then allow them to identify what that contribution is going to be, and then turn it into a story of success they can share across the organisation. So having a really strong, what we would call a strategic narrative, that just really becomes an anchor or a red thread in your organisation, is something that people can then make sense of everything they're being asked to do.
But is that possible for every organisation?
It absolutely is. I think if you have an idea about the structure of what a narrative could be, there is nothing stopping any company from forming a narrative. It gets more difficult to do the bigger the company, because there is again more complexity involved there. But we have our own strategic narrative at the Storytellers.
And it doesn't necessarily kind of need to be directly connected to the product or service that you kind of create or make.
I think it's more about where is it we're going, why are we going there, because a lot of companies fail to talk about the why. They talk about a lot about the what and the how, but they don't explain the context for it.
Okay.
And where are we going, and then what can you do to make a difference? and invite people to start to come up with their own ideas. If they can come up with their own ideas about how they can contribute to this bigger picture, they're going to take ownership of it, and they'll believe in it more. And that this is where middle managers can really make a difference, when if they can take ownership of that story, and then they can articulate it well to their teams.
Sure.
Then their teams are going to take ownership of it in exactly the same way.
Okay.
And we've seen magic happen when that happens.
Well, it's always kind of good when people understand why they're there and they get it and they want to be there. And because bottom line is, given the choice, we wouldn't choose to be bored 8 hours a day.
No.
8 hours a day.
No.
We'd choose to go to something that we go, well, this is interesting. I choose to be here, and that's great. Not to say that it's not going to be hard, or it could be boring, it could be a grind or whatever, but if you understand where you're at and why, I mean, that's all quite utopian and things, but it's an ideal to strive for.
But I think what's lacking in many organisations is that they're very good at the rational. They're very good at articulating why and where and how, but it's all very rational. It's all very data driven and backed up by facts and abstract data. I think what really needs to happen, and this is I guess where we would come in, is this idea about an emotional connection, and this is where storytelling can be so powerful in creating an emotional connection, because you're telling stories about real people.
Yeah.
And that's, as humans, that's what we're interested in, is our fellow human being, not what the computer's saying about a latest set of statistics.
Absolutely. So just conscious of keeping an eye on time, is there anything else that you think that you'd like to mention that we haven't sort of touched on the report? Is there any areas that you think actually I should point kind of this out to you before I ask you a couple of kind of
I think
final questions?
There's lots in this report. You can read it on our website, or
I'll link it up and
create a link. But the one thing that I think I would want to get across is that when a business is going through change, the leaders make the mistake of thinking that change has to be a very laborious, long-term process that they've got to go through. And there aren't many leaders that, and I suspect this is behind the 76% or 65% rather, that think that it's up to the next C-suite. Actually, there are things you can do right now. There are things you can do tomorrow to start to make a difference. One is to start to think about that strategic narrative. Start to include conversations in your business rather than just show and tell.
Sure.
But start to have this team involvement where you're asking people to give their ideas and opinions, and that can be done incredibly easily tomorrow. But these are just small things that you can actually do to make a huge difference, and an awful lot more as well. That's my main message. It doesn't have to wait until 3 years' time when we'll be ready for it, because by then it'll be too late.
I'm always also fascinated by the I have an idea that I wish people stop talking about change. Now we should stop talking about transformation, because I think there's, other than the statistics that say that generally doesn't work, when you basically structure a big program around something, I think I have a theory that there might be a psychological impact around the semantic use of words. People talk about change, talk about transformation, and then it's like what happens in the back of our heads, and how do we respond to that?
And that it's such a good point, because I think that people do fear change generally, because it challenges their existing sort of modus operandi, and that's their comfort zone. It's human nature. But if this is where a story about an individual who has experienced something and has had perhaps a degree of struggle or endeavour, that makes us empathetic.
Sure.
And when you tell a story, and I don't want to go into the neuroscience of storytelling, but when you tell a story, 7 areas of the brain light up, and you start the parts of the brain that are responsible for emotion and for colour, sense, smell, and it all lights up. So you can imagine yourself in that particular situation. Now, that provokes an enormous sense of emotion and empathy, which I think if you can harness that to a leader's story, for example, it can make a huge difference. So I think that, yes, change, the word change is people's eyes might start glazing over and rolling to the backs of their heads, but actually, if you can actually try and find a different terminology for it,
I don't think we should. I think we should stop doing it altogether, and
well,
just be different, and just do new stuff.
Yeah.
But understand where you're going and just do new stuff.
Be inspirational. Inspire your people about a vision for the future. You don't have to talk about your change journey, but you talk about your vision for the future and how they can play a part without even mentioning the word change.
Because the thing is, there's also another thing. So people talk about, there's a lot of talk around. People talk about, we need to be more agile. You're like, don't talk about being agile. Just be agile.
Yes, absolutely.
Just do more stuff.
Absolutely.
And I think it's the same for that. So don't change. Don't talk about change. Just change.
Yeah. Just be
different.
Well, they say Gandhi always said, "Be the change you want to see in the world," and that's it.
It's about doing stuff, and just keep doing stuff and learn by doing, and then keep going from there. And I think, anyway, I'm going to stop.
When JFK said he wanted to put a man on the moon, he didn't start talking about the transformation they were going to have to go through. He just talked about this inspiring story, and then people just got on with it, and that's how it happened.
Yeah, perfect. So there's two things I want to ask you kind of next. One is the question I always ask, but I also add in this new section because it's related to. So I told you I got this new book coming out, or a new book that's just came out last month, and called How to Wow. But what I'm doing is I'm doing my new bit of research, which says I'm asking people different perspectives. As if I said to you, what is wow service, wow experience, wow culture, all that sort of. What does it mean to you?
Wow. Well,
that could be your answer.
Wow. Yeah. Wow. Well, I must spell it backwards. Wow. I think, what does wow mean to me? I think it means, quite simply, that the experience that I have had of something, whatever it might be, means I want to go and talk about it to someone else in a positive way.
Brilliant. And so, building on that, because we want to keep these kind of quite short, is if I was to say, given that sort of idea, and if you were to give an instruction or a top tip to be able to help somebody create that, what would it be? Your kind of like rule of the world for the next 30 seconds. Instructions.
Well, I'm levelling this at senior leaders in business.
Brilliant. Fine.
Get back to the floor. Talk to your employees. Talk to your customers. Find out what really is going on. Don't sit in an ivory tower. Just get back to the floor, and then be inspired by them, and then start to involve them more in the conversation.
Fantastic. Brilliant. I like it. I think I might have to continue these things. Because I'm going to come up with a long list. Brilliant. So that brings me to a final question that I always ask at the end of these conversations, and that is this: is there anything that you would like to shamelessly plug?
How long have you got? I think if I'm plugging, what would I like to shamelessly plug? I am going back to our little business around my kitchen table. I would plug the idea that you can do whatever you want. If you are an entrepreneur setting out in business, you've just got to keep believing and be better than anyone else who's doing it, and you will stay ahead of the game. And so my plugging really is about just really reminiscing. It's a reminiscence rather, to say, look where we got to. We had an idea. Nobody was doing storytelling in business then. Just go for it and believe in it and keep believing in it, and then you make it happen.
Perfect. Thank you, Alison.
Thank you.